Gege Akutami, my friend, you just don't want to miss, do you? What's up, guys? That guy with a pencil here. Fun fact, I do into have it on me and keep it on me at all times. Hey, another fun fact. Gege. Dog, why don't you miss? Why? And why does it just keep getting better, dog? Why does it just keep getting better? Like, this is crazy. I'm not gonna lie. I ain't gonna cap at you. I was a little itty bit concerned about Modulo. Well, I've definitely softened a lot on the ending of JJK. And the last 5 chapters in particular, I don't hold anywhere near the same vitriol I used to. What? JJK ended, what now, like 2 years ago? 2 years ago? I think it's like literally recently 2 years ago. Or like Kojo perished 2 years ago, and then like JJK ended after. But essentially, actually JJK maybe ended last year, I think. But regardless, essentially, I was very harsh on the ending, and I was a little bit worried, right? When Gege was like, I'm gonna do a sequel series, I was like, okay. And then it's gonna be this, or no, I think it was just confirmed that Gege was doing a new work at firch. I was like, oh, okay, cool, a new work by Gege. Can't wait to see them do a new universe. Then it was gonna be confirmed to be a Jujutsu Kaisen sequel, and I was like, but of course, that was when I was still holding a little bit of vitriol, and then it came out, and at first I was like, chapter 1, pretty good, chapter 2, pretty good, chapter 3, pretty good, like, oh, no, this is pretty good, solid stuff. But man, Gege has gotten into their bag. They are deep into the bag, and they're deep into the bag on 2 levels, not just in just the general writing sense, but very specifically, Gege has decided to, I've mentioned it before, I'm going to say it again, they stopped playing these games, dog. They must have played Undertale and Deltarune or something, because they said, enough of this subtlety, enough of this complex interwoven theme work, themes.text.enter. Like, just straight blast the themes directly into your brain, and it's hitting. Maybe it is just better to do themes.text, because I don't know, it is hitting so good. But of course, why am I saying all this? What could be happening? Let's talk about it in chapter 9 of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo. Dura, Bobidi. Wait, gosh, I said it so smoothly in the live reaction. We can check it over on Patreon for as low as $1 a month. You can remember for as low as $3 a month. Check out the 30-minute live reaction to this very chapter. But with it being the case, chapter 9 of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo, Dura, Bobidi, Mechika, part 2. First things first, let's talk about this gorgeous color cover page, dog. I'm telling you. Woo! Yuji Wasaka Sensei, you're a monster. Like, it's just so good. It's just so gas. It's I can't even pretend it's not. It's the way that lighting is used as well here, and very specifically like the lighting of, like, it seems like this. Let me break down and see if I can whip out any of my artist terms. Like I mentioned many times before, despite me being that guy with the pencil, I was born with a pencil in my hand. I've never really been like professionally trained. I never went to art school or anything like that. So what I'm about to say here is going to be guy who knows something about art, who likes art, glazing and praising. But with that being the case, I love the composition of this shot in particular. The spaceship in the background, the spaceship specifically rising out of Dura. With the context of this chapter, this now even makes more sense composition-wise. The world literally splitting 2 sides of the world, but mirroring each other, but slightly different, right? Very similar. See, this composition only gets better now that I have the context of the chapter. I was glazing it in live reaction just off the artistic quality alone, because it's just a really well-made drawing. But the composition of the shot, split down the middle by the spaceship, but still ultimately connected by the different clouds that mirror each other. 2 separate sides of the same story, 2 separate sides, 2 separate people. We have Maru, who holds... This is something. And hold on. I need to... Wait a second. Hold on, I need to look up my character's name. Where are you? He's Marian. Gosh, on the JJK wiki, I need more. I forget the guy's name. Hold on. We're gonna go straight back to chapter 8. I need to know the guy's name. I need to look that up before I start recording. But essentially, what I like about that is Cross is looking away from, well, hold on. I'll go back to it once I can. I knew you come through. Where's that panel? Because he says the name there. Jabaloma. I don't know why. I knew it started with a J. I completely forgot Jabaloma's name. But Jabaloma, he's going to be important later. But very specifically, talking about the shot composition, why it's so beautiful, and why it fits so well into the chapter. Number 1, look at look at where Maru's face is soaked in, or like why his face is so heavily saturated and the light is bouncing off his cheek. Meanwhile, and when where he's looking, right? He's looking to the side, to the left, or what would be our left. He's obviously, like, from his position, he's looking to his right. But very specifically, on the panel of the shot composition, he's looking to the left. He's looking to the past. He's letting the past define him and consume him. That's why he's mostly soaked in shadow. That's why he's not looking at the camera like Maru is. And like Dabura, who, a character we obviously know is a lot to the past, he's also soaked, his face is soaked in shadow. There's a light only shining on the right side. Everything on the left side is seemingly cloaked in some form of darkness, because they are either people or someone who is consumed by or lost in the past. And very specifically, we have Cross here eating something, which, once again, is he took that off of something. That's a life that cannot be taken anymore. That's taking a resource, consuming it. Cross has so far always been about taking what he can from those he can take from, no matter what, because of what he's gone through. So he's eating the apple, he's taking the resource, he's doing what he can to survive while being focused on the past. So this entirely fits into Cross's character, completely ignoring just how beautiful the drawing process is. Then we have Maru. I'm not sure what this is. These look like stems or some sort of leaf thing, but note how Maru is not eating. Maru is holding something, multiple threads together. Once again, the idea of connection, multiple things all being held together as one. Look at how Maru's face is mostly soaked in light. He's facing towards the camera, facing, in this case, to the right side. And typically, think about it in like video game design, from the original Mario Brothers all the way to like Deltarune today, just as two video game examples. Typically, which way do you go when you're trying to make progress, when you're focused on moving forward in a level? You typically go right. Left typically references the back or going backwards. Right typically means going forward. So Maru is facing to the right. His face is soaked in light, the light of the future. He's holding multiple strands representing him being a point of connection. And notably, he in this very chapter will end up being the point of connection, or at least a major point of it, which will then lead towards the future. So him being soaked in light, looking towards the future is important. And at the same time, I want to note how both of these characters, once again using the light as a form of storytelling through the art composition, note how the light here is soaking Cross's face still, but it's just not soaking the most of his face. Why? Because he is a being that's focused on the past that still can be connected and brought into the future. That's why the light is still shining on him. I didn't realize their markings were red. Just realized that. But then on top of that, we see that Maru's face is still somewhat soaked in shadow, right? Which, composition-wise, doesn't necessarily make too much sense. That would mean the light source is like over here to the right, which even makes sense, actually. Never mind, that does make sense, because this could be like a setting or rising sun. Sun rises in the east, sets in the west, east is typically straight to the right. So, sun rising in the east. Yeah, this even works, because if the sun is rising in the east, essentially, there is a shadow on Maru's face, because he's still somewhat in the past, right? Like, the past does define him. And notably, let's look at Dabura, whose entire face is consumed by the past, even though only a portion of Cross's face is, I think I've been mixing up their names, but Cross's face is not entirely soaked in the past. You can see that there's still light shining on it. But with Dabura, his entire face, outside a little hint, is covered in darkness, because ultimately Dabura is not going to escape this chapter, which is named for him. That he is the titular character of this chapter. But note how the light of his hair and just the whole of Dabura, or Dura, gosh, I'm speaking too fast and the names are getting mixed up. Dura has his entire back soaked in light, because his back, the back that people were looking upon, guided them to the light of the future. So he's soaked in light that way. And also, he's just portrayed in a more bright light entirely, because, you know, he's a character who leaves. And Maru and Cross is sitting down. And of course, we have Dabura Dabura in the water. Dabura's one lone eye here, being soaked in the murky past, while these two are sitting representing the future, and he's just sitting here watching over it all. That makes sense. He's going to be established as, once again, the strongest fighter Samodia had to offer. So it makes sense that he is the foundation for the future, the foundation for the spaceship, the foundation for these two characters, and specifically Dura's dream of coexistence and neighborhood. So since he's the foundation, he is what resides in the water. He is what acts as the basis for it all. So overall, an amazing cover page just in like visual storytelling alone. If you think I was dragging it way too much, I don't blame you, but I like to read through all this, and it's just very, very pretty. All right, all like intentional storytelling aside, I think it's just very, very pretty. Yuji Iwasaki's art quality is fantastic, from the way they use different levels of shading, once again, to build into their storytelling, to the different levels and designs into the color pages, clothing design in comparison to the regular base manga, which they already do regular shading for, and just the art quality. Like, once again, I can barely even see the guiding lines on Dura's hair. It's so well built that it's like the coloring itself does the line work for you. It's just really, really good. Just fantastic work by Yuji Iwasaki Sensei. Let's waste more time. Let's hop into the chapter itself. So we open up with a little spin-off thing, like Soda Soda. It's an adorable little thing. I completely forgot about this after reading the chapter. I literally just recorded the live reaction, took a slight little break to go re-up on my water, and completely forgot about this. But we see a young Yuka and a young Tsurugi. Very specifically, we see girls at Yuka's school talking about, guess what? Or go for it, Yuka Okotsu. Guess what? I heard Tsurugi and Mizuho like each other. This info's legit. My older sister told me. But don't tell anybody. And Yuka naturally is like, I'm not supposed to tell anybody. Then she gets welcomed home after coming home after her day of school. And she says, but as long as I tell them not to tell anybody, that means I can tell anyone, right? Which she says them back, and she immediately goes to Panda. And now, I mentioned how my feelings on the ending of JJK have softened. You know, time has passed, and I've mentioned many times before, it's hard for me to hold negative feelings in my heart for an extended period of time. It really is. Like, I can't think of much of it. I still hate Panda. I don't care that he's not sentient, or he's barely sentient anymore. I don't care that he can't even move. I don't care that Yuta abandoned him and everything. Good. I'm glad. This chapter is a negative 5 out of 10 because Panda feature. Okay, I'm lying. But still. Panda, man. Like, you mean to tell me we got to see Mahito and Panda get lines before I got to see any of Yuji? Not a single Yuji line? At least Maki and Yuta both got lines. Yeah, they're old, but still, they got lines. Not a single Yuji line. No Megami cameo. Well, we got a cameo. But, like, no Megami, no bar. Nothing. You gotta give me Panda lines first. And the reason I say lines is because Yuka ends up stitching to Panda. Tsurugi has a crush on a girl named Mizuho. And then she leaves Panda behind when she later tells Tsurugi, shake it off, Tsurugi. Or it goes, shake it off, Tsurugi. And Yuka goes, it's your turn to clean the clerk's warehouse, Tsurugi. And Tsurugi admits, oh no, I forgot. And he goes to clean out the warehouse. And Panda says, hey, so what do you like about Mizuho? And obviously Tsurugi turns in absolute horror as Panda simply smiles at him. Now, admittedly, part of me was thinking, doesn't this contradict, like, the extra chapter bit that we got? But not necessarily. Considering it's called Shake It Off Tsurugi, it could be implied that Tsurugi heard Panda speak, turned, saw Panda smiling at him, but it was like, give me real. That's not right. And then essentially repressed that memory for years later, and then Yuka kept treating him as a teddy bear. And then eventually Panda had his moment where he spoke in front of them both when they were older, right? That's what I think it is. I don't think this, like, retcons that extra chapter bit that we got. But with it being the case, it's a cute little opener. Once again, to distract from the rather... I wouldn't say this chapter is, like, overly dark. Not necessarily, but the implications and references and allegory is very, very heavy. Not even just heavy-handed, but just very heavy. So, with that being the case, we hop into... Hold on. I need to take a little sippy whippy. Where's my sippy whippy? Where's my cuppy whoppy, bro? Where are you? 18! Wait. I'm really about to turn into something perfect sub right now. Where is my sippy whippy? Hold on, birthday shit. It's not here. I literally went to refill it, and I think I may have left it by the fridge. Whoops. So, we're going into this review raw! But with that being the case, we get lore on the Samurians, and very specifically the Rumelians, but just general Samurian biology. Cross explains, the third eye is an essential organ for every being on Samuria, and is the source of a Royuroka. Now, admittedly, I have no idea if I'm saying Royuroka correctly. The reason I'm saying Royuroka and not Rolo Luca is just because that's my Spanish kicking in. I'm sorry, that's the only reason I kind of know it as. Like, Royuroka sounds like anything like pollo. Pollo is pollo, not pollo or polo. Like, or polo. Like, it's not that. It's pollo. Just because 2 L's equals Y. I'm doing it like that. I don't know. Something about Royuroka sounds better to me than Rolo Luca. But either one makes sense. It could be Rolo Luca. It could be Royuroka. I'm going to call it Royuroka. But with it being the case, we get something big. The third eye is an essential organ for every being on Samuria. 2 things there. Number 1, the third eye being an essential organ. It does make sense. Obviously, if we had a third eye, it'd be an essential organ for us. But it is, once again, being set apart as unique. It is an essential organ in of itself. It's not saying our eyes. It's saying specifically the third eye is something unique. But in this case in particular, it being the source of Royuroka. Royuroka is presumably their cursed energy. Or is it... Actually... maybe their cursed energy or maybe their cursed technique. I'm not exactly... Did I break this? I realize this pencil I break. But essentially, it may be the source of their... Oh, no. Never mind. It is just cursed energy. This was right here. I didn't even notice that. But there we go. It is cursed energy. So Royuroka is their source of cursed energy, which is very interesting because it is different from where cursed energy comes from for humans, or at least humans from Earth, as we will find out that Samurians are also considered humans. Because... on Earth, cursed energy comes from the stomach. It is guided by the brain, but it does not come from the brain. And we also find out, the other major thing I want to point out, every being on Samoria, we do finally get a name for the home planet of the Samurians, or very specifically, what we now know is the Rumelians in the one Deskunte. Or technically, two Deskunte now I think about it, because we know where one is now. We know where one other Deskunte is now. But that's interesting. It comes from their third eye. It comes from bellies for the humans. But notably, we know that they presumably use their mind to guide their own cursed energy. Yet at the same time, we know that human sorcerers use their mind to guide cursed energy that is produced from their stomach. So that's cool. But Samoria being the name of their planet, that's the major thing here. Mainly because we just didn't know if their planet was actually called. We wouldn't call Earth, well, in context, we wouldn't call Earthling or people from Earth Earthens or Earthrians, or whatever it would be. You could say we would call ourselves Earthlings, right? But Earthlings are like every living thing on the planet. We wouldn't call humans Earthlings, we'd call humans. They are Earthlings because they're humans, but Earthlings is a more broad term. But very specifically, learning that the planet is called Samoria, very, very, very interesting. Considering how much lore we're getting, I wonder if we're ever going to find out an origin for that name. We may not, though. That's perfectly fine, though. We have Samoria as the planet that they came from. We have the mention of the third eye, which is the source of their cursed energy equivalent, and notably there are unique properties behind it that are interesting because humans don't have an equivalent. As it's said by Cross, however, only Rumelians shed a tear from the third eye when a Kalion dies. So this is interesting because what is said afterwards. There's a twofold thing why it's interesting. The only times other Samorians shed tears from their third eyes are when they are born and when they die. The shedding of tears Whoa, why? I just showed the same thing in live reaction. The shedding of tears takes such a toll on one's brain that it can be fatal. So this is interesting, right? Obviously, our eyes are not directly linked to our brain. If they are directly linked to our brain, obviously, our lines are right next to the brain. But very specifically, if you'll note, the brain is like curved. It's a curved mass. It seems like it's very likely that the third eye is probably not necessarily like a false eye source, because it does seemingly still function as an eye. But their eye is directly built into their brain. It is part of their matter. So obviously, when we have our tear ducts, which are stored right here, it's from the Samurians, who have seemingly a tear duct stored here, but that tear duct is likely a direct product of their brain. Meanwhile, our tears are not formed directly from our brain. They are something separate. They're the water leaking from our eyes. Meanwhile, it's very likely that the tears of a Samurian are more like a brain. Honestly, I just almost want to call it an aneurysm. Because the shedding of tears takes such a toll on one's brain, it can be fatal. So imagine if whenever you cried, it wasn't just your tear ducts leaking, but it was your literal brain fluids leaking out. Like the blood from your brain, essentially. So that's what I think that is. That's neat, too. But I do wonder what happened to the Rumelians for them to have this. The fact that such thing is the case, but it can be forced out not just by birth or not just by death, but very specifically when a Kalion dies is interesting. Last chapter I theorized the Kalion were something of a permanently manifested curse technique, directly intertwined with the Samorians in general in their way of life, or very specifically a Rumelian Samorian in the past who created them to watch over the Rumelian people. However, with this being the case, it is interesting that it would force them to undergo what would essentially be a really painful process. Imagine if whenever a certain species on the planet perished, spontaneously, I don't know, your stomach tore open and bled out a little bit. Seemingly, it obviously doesn't slaughter all of the Rumelian people, but the fact that it can be almost fatal is actually very, very interesting. And considering that the belief in the Kalion is set up, at least in this chapter, to be a form of religious belief, or something that, yeah, it's literally just that, like a form of religious belief rather than actually direct biological links and connections, I do wonder why that, like, genetic sense memory is directly linked to a species that clearly is not Samorian, or at least, well, is Samorian in the sense that it comes from Samoria, but, like, not a human Samorian. It's a manifestation of a beast. I do wonder why they cry specifically with that. It's unique. And with that being the case, that context is important as it sets up for later in the chapter. I wonder why we're learning about when Samorians and the Third Eyes cry, especially if the fact that they only happen when they're born or die. Someone could be born in this chapter? We know someone's not being born in this chapter. But with it being the case, we see that the older gentleman from before, from last chapter, says, "The daughter of the Skunte chieftain was killed by a Kalion." Wait, no. Oh, no. This is actually Dura speaking. Never mind. My bad. But we see it's Dura saying, "The daughter of the Skunte chieftain was killed by a Kalion." And which admittedly is one of my favorite moments of Dura in his very limited screen time, because he's like, what does that matter? That doesn't have anything to do with us, because we know that presumably that only happened in the canal area. So what was she doing off the boat in the canal? Like why knowing that was in one's Kalyan territory, why would the daughter of the chieftain be unguarded in that territory? Like, sure, say that they need to go there anyway because the rest stop is built there. Considering the rest stop was actually supposed to be run by Rumelians, like why was she there in that area to be attacked in terms of that? And considering what we learned about the Diskunte, it's very likely that she was essentially set up as like a sacrifice in order to be that point. And also even extra possible that the daughter isn't even, considering the nature of the Diskunte being willing to lie and deceive and do anything in order to start something. And we see that ultimately Cross knows what that means, even if Dura's going to play it off by asking and. As he says, don't tell me. But the older gentleman speaks and says, Kalyans were eradicated from the Diskunte territory many years ago. And I do wonder, did that have any effect on the Rumelians? Like, how many Rumelians took fatal brain damage from a mass number of Kalyans being slaughtered? Like, do they have to bear witness to the Kalyans' end or not? I don't know. It's very interesting. But regardless, Kalyans were eradicated from the Diskunte territory many years ago. They are saying this tragedy never would have happened if we Rumelians had not provoked the Kalyans. The Diskunte chieftain is demanding 90% of our territory, including the canal, in exchange for his daughter's life, or else he's threatening to attack in retaliation. That is crazy. Don't get me wrong, though. I fully understand. We're not fully understanding, because once again, I don't have kids. But just knowing, or at least having a solid guess of what I would be like if one of my own children was slain by a wild beast that was associated with, well, not even if it was associated with, if my child was slain by a wild beast in an area that I had left to other people. But then again, no, I can't fully excuse it. The fact that he wants 90% of their territory, right? Well, 90%, including the canal that they built, that they worked on after his own people weren't able to do it. I can't excuse it. I would tweak out over my own daughter too. I know for a fact I would. I'd tweak out over any children I'll have. But the idea that he wants 90% of their territory, so much of it, dog, you just want them gone, right? Like, imagine forcing an entire group of people onto one tiny section of the land that they belong to after you already took so much of their land from them when you weren't even from the area that you now dominate. I wonder what this is an allegory for. I wonder what Diskunte as a people is an allegory for. But with that being the case, obviously those are demands. The only reason I'll go into later why I think the Diskunte chieftain maybe even be lying. Like, once again, I kind of low-key want to yell proof. Like, where is her body? And what was she? But see, the only thing is, though, like, that, what was she doing there? That has the negative connotations also on our world. But I don't think gay means that, and I don't mean it in that sense. Like, what was she even doing there? What was that? Like, not in that way. But I do think it is kind of strange that spontaneously he lost his daughter, and now he's looking to use, essentially, how to put this? He's using the death of a loved one in order to clearly a military objective. He's using his daughter's death as an excuse to conquer land. That's the whole point. To conquer land and oppress others. That's all that Diskunte chieftain's really interested in. Let's be completely real. 90% of the territory for one daughter's life, and to force as many people as he's trying to force. We now know, presumably all 50,000. Well, all 50,000. Is it 50,000? How many Samurians are left? I think it's like 50,000. All 50,000 Samurians, or really all 50,000 Rumelians who are on the ship, that may or may not appear at the end of the chapter, they were essentially going to be forced to live onto 1/10 of their area when they were already struggling to live in the current area that they lived in because of the nature of the land that they were on. So all that the Diskunte chieftain was resigning these people to was undeniably death, right? Like, he was trying to either slaughter them directly through direct conflict, and or he was going to try and starve them out by forcing them to a small area where they simply could not coexist. Very, very familiar. Once again, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but you know what the allegory is for. I think there are many clear references in our human history where that is the case, where the slaughter of one individual is used to justify the slaughter of thousands, realistically all for the sake of just gathering certain territory. And notably, we'll even have another previous example that links to examples in our history again that multiple different nations across our nation or planet's history have done. We'll go into it soon enough. But with it being the case, or he's threatening to attack in retaliation. But one of the gentlemen from last chapter is like, but that's a totally false accusation. How can they get away with that? And ultimately, the older gentleman admits, The envoy has already brought a word challenging us to a duel. And we have cross-explained a bit of the Deskunte culture. The Deskunte do not decide outcomes through war. They declare war after the outcome has already been decided. In Samuria, the most powerful people are generally the ones who wield authority. The same is true for us Rumelians. But the Deskunte tribe takes it one step further. Whoever's the strongest is the one who's right. They settle disputes by having each side choose a champion to battle in a one-on-one duel. If they win, they're free to trample on their opponents until their goal has been achieved. If they lose, they accept their opponent's demands and end the dispute. So, obviously, this is meant to remind us of someone, of something, and their belief system and how they viewed the world. Clearly, the Deskunte people are very, very similar to Ryomen Sukuna. The idea that everything is decided by power, and a system that's not decided by power making sense at all doesn't make sense at all, unless they don't live by that. And also, the idea that the most powerful wield authority is something that even the Rumelians themselves believe in, but not to the same degree as the Deskunte. So, the idea of Sukuna possibly having Samurian ties, very, very interesting. The other thing that's weird, though, about that, especially with the end of this chapter, it's strange. Because this is obviously meant to be, if not like a direct reference, it is a reference to Sukuna's own ideology and his own belief that the idea that might makes right, essentially, which is a philosophy that does exist in our world too in many cases. It is interesting that it doesn't seem possible for Sukuna to have any real ties to the Samurians, unless this is meant to imply that human DNA and Samurian DNA is so similar that Sukuna's spontaneous mutation, or maybe even Royoloka, right? The idea of cursed energy, since that's a universal thing, they call it Royoloka. On Earth, they call it cursed energy. The possibility of a Sukuna being born in either place is interesting, because based on what we know for this chapter, it's realistically impossible for Sukuna to have any sort of ties back to Samuria, because it doesn't seem like anyone's left the planet before what happens at the end of this chapter. So a friend of mine does have a theory about Sukuna possibly being half Deskunte, or specifically half Samurian, possibly Rumelian in particular. The only reason I'd say he's probably half Deskunte, if that were to be the case, if that were possible, is because of the bone structures that come out, right? Like, he has the 4 extra eyes, and if you'll notice, the extra eye containers for Sukuna, they are not like flesh, they're not big eyelids, they're literally like bone structures. So if he was hypothetically half human, half Samurian, or half Deskunte, it would make sense that his horns don't manifest properly, they manifest in that. But then again, Sukuna does have an extra eye, he doesn't just have one big third, get out of the way. He doesn't just have one big third eye. He doesn't have that core organ that's built into his brain. He just has the extra 2 eyes that may or may not be built into his brain. I don't know. It's hard to tell whether or not Sukuna's eyes directly affect the brain. But it's clear that the Samurians have never really left their planet up to this point. And that's how they end up on Earth later on. So it is interesting. I don't know. Sukuna may just be like the overall nature of the universe leading a certain way and producing a Deskunte type individual on Earth, even if that wasn't really supposed to happen. Because it's weird that Sukuna's ideology lines up with the Deskunte very, very well. Those extra bone structures he have line up with the Deskunte people having extra bone structures. His heavy belief on power, even his build in comparison, like, it just works really, really well. And of course, you know, it seems like the Deskunte are, at least their design is also meant to somewhat mirror Sukuna, right? You know how Sukuna typically, he didn't even have like a shirt most of the time. He just had a cloak he wore over his shoulders, and he always had the pants with the belt around his waist. That also seems to be a direct tie back to the Deskunte, but it can't, like, the Deskunte couldn't have been there. Like, I don't think so. It must be something just built into the universe itself that led to Sukuna existing. I always theorized that Sukuna was like an experiment by Kenjaku, but there's debate on whether or not Kenjaku actually was born in the Heian era or predates it. I, for the longest time, believed that he predated it because him having Druv, who comes from a period that's before the Heian era, but people point out that Druv's noted to be on his second incarnation, which I always read as second incarnation as in, you know, he was reincarnated into a new physical form, but a second incarnation implies that he had his original life, then a first incarnation, then a second incarnation. Meaning that and obviously the culling game itself was seemingly something that Kenjaku didn't invent. It was something that existed beforehand. So maybe Druv was part of the original culling game, and maybe Kenjaku was born in the Heian era, came up with the idea, and then lived on throughout the era. I don't know. Because he says, notably, Kenjaku says he'd been fighting for 1,000 years, which obviously links it back to the Heian era. Why would he not be fighting before that? And also, there's another statement of Kenjaku, like, something about Kenjaku being like a sorcerer of the Heian era. So, I don't know. It's very, very strange. So maybe Kenjaku isn't directly responsible for Sukuna, but in the same way that I think Satoru Gojo was meant to act as like a balance patch from the universe, essentially being like, okay, things are getting too weak here. Let me throw in Satoru Gojo as this really strong anomaly in order to raise the level of everything. I thought that maybe Ryomen Sukuna would be a balance patch of like, here's the universe being really, really strong. Let's throw him in to mess things up and mix things around. So maybe that's why he has so many ties back to the Sukune, or at least seeming ties. I don't know. It's very complicated. I'm not sure how all of this plays into the idea of Sukuna, but Sukuna is very clearly heavily being referenced here. And with that being the case, Sukuna would love it here, because him being the strongest in the verse, so presumably, we'll see how strong Dabura is. Supposedly he's equal to Sukuna. He would have ruled this entire planet. But even then, we're going to see that this belief system isn't even true. And which will also feed into the allegory eventually. I'll get to that in a second. As we see that ultimately the man from last chapter is like, a duel, huh? A duel sounds great to me. Right, Dura? And both Maru and Cross look on her like, what's going on? And the other guys from last chapter are like, oh yeah, Maru and Cross don't know about it, huh? That makes sense. I'm sure they'd already been born, but how old were they back then? Before our village was destroyed, the Discute hosted a fighting tournament. And Dura was the winner. So, Dura is not just, a random powerful guy. He is the powerful guy. He is the strongest that the Rumelians have to offer, as no one else even seems to be a contender. But notably, Dura himself doesn't actually seem like that confident in the idea of a duel. You can see by his facial expression, you can see by the ellipses. He probably is willing to fight. He definitely can fight, but he doesn't want to fight. And we see that ultimately Maru's like, really? I mean, I know he was strong, but, which is very true, right? To imagine that he won an entire tournament. And we see that apparently, according to other Rumelians, even the Discute war chieftain participated in the tournament. All the matches were rigged to favor their side, but Dura still won. Now, this is interesting. I've been wondering if the war chief at the time is still the same chieftain we see command Dabura later, or if the war chieftain was Dabura. I don't know, it's weird. It's very weird. Once again, we'll go into the idea of the politics of the Discute and what's hinted at with them later on. But we see that ultimately, the Rumelians believe in Dura. Dura, you're the strongest Sumerian. You got this. It's very interesting that they call themselves Sumerians. Because they don't say strong Rumelian, strong Sumerian. But I suppose they're referring to Rumelian as in their whole species rather than their ethnicity, as their ethnicity is likely Rumelian. So, back and forth. But we see that Dura says, stop. There are a lot of people who didn't participate in that tournament. And that does build up to Dabura, now I think about it. The idea that not all people participate in the tournament. So Dabura didn't. But there are a lot of people who didn't participate in that tournament. Plus. But actually, does he even get to say the plus? I don't think so. Because we get Cross's flashback continuing, or his narration of the flashback going, at the time, I should have thought more deeply about why Dura had never told Maru and me anything about the tournament. And it is interesting that in spite of Dura winning the previous tournament, their village was still destroyed. Their people were still trampled over. And they were put in the scenario that they were put in by the time of this flashback. So it's clear that even if the Discute do set up these tournaments or these duels and stuff like that, and they follow the way of the strongest, Dura, despite proving himself to be the strongest in that case, wasn't enough, right? They still were trampled over. Once again, showing that hypothetically the Discute don't really actually care about whatever rules they set up. Once again, why I think maybe the daughter dying must have been like a setup, or may have not even happened. May have just been, hey, go hide for a little bit. We're going to use you as an excuse. But we'll get to that. As we see Cross ask, can't we refuse the duel? And the older gentleman says, no, we can't. The Discute tribe is even more ruthless to those who turn their back on a warrior's duty. Refusing is out of the question. And that's really, really rough. That's the thing, right? Ultimately, but the idea of combat being so heavily built into their culture on both ends, and the Discute essentially looking for a reason, it is truly something they don't have a choice over. That's what I meant to mention back on this page. The setup here, or at least what's implied through the setup, is the idea that the Discute are in a you win or you win situation, right? They win for losing, really. Because here, they're only offering the duel to act as a predication for attacking anyway. So say they win the duel, they attack anyway as they originally planned to. That's why Carl says that they declare war after the outcome has already been decided. But even if they lose, right? Say what happened didn't happen, and they lost. Okay. They just don't declare war then. That doesn't give the other tribe leeway to declare war back. And notably, it doesn't even seem like these duels would end in death. These are not duels to the death, except for the later one we see. But these duels are actually just a way for them to judge how strong the strongest warrior of another tribe is. Okay, we aren't engaging in conflict. The other tribe didn't want to engage in conflict in the first place. We'll go back, we'll get our guy stronger, we'll come back with either a stronger guy, or we'll make the same guy stronger and have him challenge you again, and again, and again. Like, this is the thing. It's a lose-lose scenario where you're going to fight no matter what. And with what the old man says here, yeah, they're going to have to fight no matter what. It's no matter what kind of outcome or planning or anything they have to do, fighting is the only option. And essentially, they were doomed from the start. But of course, we see that Cross admits, So refusing would be the same as losing. Meaning that regardless, they fight or they don't fight, they fight and they lose, they're going to be trampled over. They fight and they win, they won't be trampled over just yet, but they'll have to fight again. Or they run away or they refuse to fight and they will be trampled over. It is a lose, lose, lose scenario. But we see that Cross admits, even if they attack us, we can't fight back. But this time, we had to fight, or else the entire Rumelian tribe could be killed. And that's the thing, right? Ultimately, the idea of forcing them into 10% of their current land when they were already struggling on 100% of their current land. Remember, sickness was rampant. There were limited resources. Plants weren't growing. Crops weren't growing. It was already rough. Forcing the 10% of the land might as well just be deciding to slaughter them all. Even if the Deskunde people wouldn't actively go in slaughtering Rumelians, forcing them to live in such a compact area wouldn't be possible. But we see that Dura, ultimately knowing that there is no choice here, says, fine, I'll accept the challenge. I'll fight. And we see everyone in this stadium. Notably, there are multiple tribes represented here. It is not just the Deskunte, it's not just the Rumelians, but it's the Deskunte, the Rumelians, and the many other tribes of Samuria. But we see the once confident gentleman who believed that Dura would ultimately raffle stomp whatever warrior the Deskunte had to offer, take one look, and, well, it's not the same. On the day of the duel, the outcome was clear the moment the Rumelian warriors laid eyes on the Deskunte champion. Suddenly, it felt like my heart was going numb. Wait, no. Gosh, why do I always mess up when I'm reading a fantastically written line? Suddenly, it felt like my heart was going numb. My limbs weren't mine anymore, and my brain was being scraped raw. It was the worst feeling I ever felt, and I'll never forget it. We see Maru looking on, seemingly somewhat calm, or at least flat-faced, but still worried here. Meanwhile, Cross, these two gentlemen, they're just looking on in absolute despair. And presumably because they, like sorcerers, can sense the level of power or Woyoroka inside somebody and just know, okay, a fight can be decided essentially by amounts of cursed energy off a rip. And it is Dabura, the current king of the Samurians. All the Samurians who are now currently on Earth, or at least he's the grand weapon that they have. The grand weapon that Cross himself will later go on to believe in as the reason that they could conquer Earth if they really needed to. And Dabura looks fantastic here. This image alone gave me massive DBS Broly vibes. Very obviously base DBS Broly. And even a little bit of original DBZ Broly. Just the solemn look in his eyes, the shadow cast over his body. It's very, very interesting. And notably, once again, with the idea of the Samurians just having different types of ears, not only does Dabura have the massive head horns, but his ears are pierced here. I thought these were just part of his biology, but no, these are seemingly earrings that are a part of his culture that are built into his very, very long ears. And notably, the Samurians as a whole have all different types of ears, and their just base ears are drawn differently from how Yuji Sensei draws regular human ears. So that's one of the distinctions. They have their own built-in automatic markings. They have the third eye, which stores all the Royoroka or the cursed energy, or produces it. And then their ears are also a different way that they're distinct from Earth humans, as they will be described as humans here as well, not just Samurians. But with it being the case, Dabura just standing there is enough to crush any sort of hope or belief. And we see that Cross immediately sensing the outcome, right? Like you'll look at something and you know what's going to happen before it even begins. As Cross declares, "You can't do it, Dura! Let's just run away! He'll kill you!" Obviously, Dabura is so unbelievably powerful that there's not even a chance. It's as if they sent Kusakabe to fight Sukuna. Oh wait, they actually did that. But with it being the case, Dura's a good man. He's a strong man, a strong warrior, but Dabura is just in an entirely different league. And we see that ultimately Cross is just begging Dura to run. He's like, we can't lose. We cannot lose you. No one will blame you if you run away, Dura. Everyone's so grateful to you, and that will never change. So please. But Dura turns and says, Cross. Essentially to silence him, right? He doesn't even say any more than that. He just simply says his name and then turns back to Dabura, who stands even taller than Dura, barefoot. And once again, this is what I'm talking about, where he resembles Sukuna in the sense, not just because of the taller, wide build, but basically look at the pants, the wrap around the pants. It's very different from Deskunte culture, and very specific. Or no, it's Deskunte culture in comparison to Rumelian culture. But even then, we saw Deskunte last chapter who are dressed in more traditional roles. Maybe this is just their battle outfit. I'm not sure. As we see, Dura walks up to Dabura and drops something that they didn't know about, or at least hints at something. Dabura, it's been a while. How's your little sister? we see Dabura look down into the side, clearly sad about something. And immediately, it's clear, right? Dura even says, they took her hostage. And Dabura himself admits, Dura, I don't know what to do. They told me I have to fight you to the death. And Dura says, it's fine, don't worry about it. The outcome here isn't what is important. I do have one request for you, though. And he says a request to Dabura that cannot be heard. At least, but we do find out what that request is. However, obviously Dabura's the strongest, right? The war chieftain, who I assume is this gentleman right here, the war chieftain is not stronger than Dabura. Dabura is the strongest Somorian on the planet. If Dura was once believed to be prior, and Dura had in the past has beaten the war chieftain of the previous tournament, and the war chieftain is sending Dabura out to essentially confirm the kill against Dura, Dabura is the strongest. So, supposedly, if in the Skunte culture, might makes right, those who have power ones with authority, how come Dabura isn't the one in charge? It's because, obviously, just like in our own universe, in our own world, just because might makes right, just because the one who has the most power typically runs things, this, that, and the third, it doesn't mean that those with less power can't resort to manipulation and subterfuge. In order to make Dabura fight Dura, who we will later find out, I'll just say it now, Dura and Dabura were best friends. They were allies and training partners before the Great Split happened. Since Dabura is so powerful, they needed to force him to fight and slaughter Dura, his former friend. And they did that by kidnapping his sister. And that's why I believe, ultimately, it may be the case where the daughter of the chieftain was essentially either sacrificed in order to justify mass expansion and or sacrificed to the Kalyan in order to justify mass expansion, or was just a straight up flat out lie. Because it's clear that the Skunte people don't actually believe might makes right, and those who has the most power, those who's the strongest, should do as they want. It's clear that Dabura himself, despite being the strongest, is not interested in mass expansion, is not interested in overriding and destroying the Rumelian people. But since he has a sister, since he has a point of weakness, the Skunte people who want to expand, clearly the war chieftain, at least in this case, is using any excuse he can to manipulate Dabura into doing this, into slaying his own best friend, and into taking this land over. And he's using the Kalyan, or essentially a difference in beliefs, as the excuse for it. On top of, the loss of his daughter, supposedly. Now, there are many different times in our human history where one person has been lost, quote unquote, and that has led to the loss of thousands, if not millions, of lives. Many a time before. And there are also many conflicts in our history that have been based entirely around quote unquote beliefs and stuff like that, or beliefs, especially beliefs that don't actually believe in violence and actually very heavily go against violence. There are many times beliefs such as those have been used to trample over another people. And this is clearly an example of that being reflected in Sumerian culture, which is why I'm saying Gege has played Deltarune and or Toby Fox, because they're going themes.text all the way. As Dura makes his request, and Dabura says, all right. We see that Dura says, let me speak up for a bit longer. There are more tribes here than the Rumelians than the Skunte. Once again, Dura is going to feed into a certain belief, or a certain allegory, I believe, at least. But we see that Dura admits, hear me. I will admit that there's been a wall between us Rumelian. Wait, let me slow down. Take me down. Hear me. I will admit that there's been a wall between Rumelians and the rest of you, due to our Kalyan religion. But what caused the exile of the Rumelian people 10 years ago was not some religious war over Kalyans. It was an invasion by the Skunte over the Mole Quarry. Mole is a special ore that can convert Royoloka into all forms of energy. It's true that the Skunte tribe is making a huge profit from the mole they're mining. They'll do the same with this whole incident involving the daughter. Shh, don't say something so reckless. You'll get killed. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it after all this time. But if a war starts over economic ambitions, but gets framed as a religious war instead, other tribes will be reluctant to interfere. They'll assume there's something they're not aware of going on, which makes them hesitant to step in and offer aid. Now, I don't think I need to tell you, there are religious wars raging to this day. But this is also true. I'm not going to go too deep into it, because once again, I like having a channel. I don't want to get detonated. But clearly Gege is being pretty heavy-handed to many wars that even still rage on to this day, where religion, or the loss of life, and a difference or loss of a singular life is being used to justify the slaughter of thousands of people, the slaughter of millions of people. Even though, in many cases, that belief system doesn't even promote violence, especially not interhuman violence. Human life in most religions, there are some belief systems where it's not sacred, but in many cases, in many of the most popular belief systems that have been used to justify religious war, essentially religious expansionism, the conquering and slaughtering and pillaging of countless people, a lot of them actually have it to where human life is sacred and you should never trample over it, especially over something as petty as economic desires, economic belief. But that's typically very true to our case, in many cases of human history, where war and conquest and all of that, religion has been the reason behind it, you know? Whether it be a difference in, whether it be one's own personal belief or something like that, it's been used to conquer and trifle and destroy and ruin and pillage and do everything. And typically, the religion is an excuse, a cover for these base economic reasons. Or something different, right? Oh, such and such group is dangerous, right? The Kalyans are meant to be like a representation of not just, possible religious beliefs, but also very specifically, they're like, oh, weapons that are beyond our understanding or control. X group has weapons beyond our understanding and control. Thusly, we must do everything in our power to go over there and stop them and stomp over them and destroy them. Oh, what do you mean we went over there just to secure the massive amount of natural resources that they have? We would never do that. It's all for X reason. They have dangerous weapons. Then it comes out years later, oh, that group and or nation never had weapons. They just wanted the resource there. In our world, it's commonly oil. Mole is essentially the oil equivalent here. It's the gas. It's stuff like that. There have been nations that have been toppled, thrown over, destroyed, countless lives sacrificed, lost, and or taken, all for natural resources like oil. There have been entire nations that have essentially turned into, like, realistically one-stop shops for one thing, because their land is very good for it, natural resources. And typically, religious or weapons, quote-unquote danger, is what the excuse has always been. Though it's really all about economics and money and resources and control and power. And the Skunte are clearly meant to be a reference to essentially every single nation that's ever done something like that. And notably, the inaction of other groups or other nations in this case, that's what the tribes are meant to represent, the Rumelians and the Skunte are just one of a few tribes, or two of a few tribes. Their existence, yet their lack of interference, is also true to our very world today, where there are countless atrocities being committed, and countless atrocities stated to be committed that are acknowledged in the worldwide scale, just like Dura is. Essentially think of Dura as all the people pointing out the massive injustices that are taking place all over our planet right now, but a lot of nations are not interfering with those injustices. Why? Because they have special interests in there. Or there's a reason, quote-unquote, behind the mass slaughter of people, and they're like, oh, well, we don't just fully understand it, so we need to let them do what they do. Essentially, Dura is representing that. And also the inaction of the tribes, right? And the fear of them based on the sheer power of the Skunte. That's also another thing, where there are nations in history that have been so unbelievably powerful that even if they completely understand that the excuses that they give are just justifications to justify their mass slaughter and destruction of entire people's livelihoods and homes and places, all for the sake of natural resources, they're fearful of the raw power that those people have, and thusly they don't say anything about it, or they don't do anything about it. This is happening to this day, right now. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if you've been sentient and alive and on the internet, you know of the numerous atrocities that are being committed to this day that other extremely powerful people are either facilitating, allowing, encouraging, even, all for the sake of their own agendas and their own beliefs, all for economic and consistent power. That's what I'm talking about. Gege's being very heavy-handed with it, but it's clear. It's honest and it's true to life. And I think that's the most unfortunate thing. I wish I could say, oh, this is just like some very specific alien people stuff. This would never happen on Earth. It's happened on Earth. It will happen on Earth. It's continued to happen on Earth. And unfortunately, the way humanity is going, it doesn't look like it's going to stop happening on Earth anytime soon. But with that being the case, think of this as Dura's final plea, right? There's nothing else he can do, as he says, but religion at its core is supposed to be rooted in everyday life, not some grand cultural ideology. We weren't asking you to respect our religion itself, but a way of life which grew from it. We Rumelians are only humans, just like you. So please, accept us. Help us. Accept us as your neighbors. Obviously, this is Dura's plea. He's trying to get everyone to acknowledge that ultimately, despite the differences between them, and notably they do have distinct differences, right? The Skunte people have horns, the Rumelians don't. They have their specific ties to the Kalyans, which seems to be like a biological thing as well. It's not just like a religious belief and stuff like that. There are fundamental differences. but they're still ultimately humans, right? Whether the humans meant to be submarines in this case, regardless. It's like with us. Dog, if you were to cut me open, if you were to look inside me, you would find the same red blood of someone that's from the other side of the planet. You take any human on the planet, we all bleed red. We're all humans. We decided many years ago, or sometimes even very recently, that, oh, well, my land stops here, so I'm a different human than you. But ultimately, we're still humans. We look different. There are many different humans who look different. You can pluck of the 8 billion humans, there may be a few that look like me. In fact, I know 2 who look very close to me, but even then there are differences between the people I look like. And those 2 people are literally my cousins. Like, literally both first cousins. So of course we're going to look very similar. But even still, we still do our fundamental differences, but we're all human. And that's the same thing with the Sumerians here. They're all Sumerians. They're all humans. They're all the same species. There's no reason for them to abandon one of their own or destroy one of their own or trample over them uselessly. Or not even uselessly, just for the sake of economic profit, because all life is sacred, especially all human life. There's no real way to justify mass slaughter outside of greed and, like, really just a lack of regard for human life. So, of course, Dura doesn't want to promote anything that could lead to the mass loss of human life. And he's begging for a hope that maybe they could reach an understanding. Maybe they could be understood. But of course, very similar to our real world, in spite of the pleas of an honest man begging to have his people be spared under the base truth. It's not even like an assumption. The base truth that they are ultimately all the same and there's no need for such mass violence and slaughter and loss of life. The war chieftain, the leader, he who has power over the powerful discontent people, says 2 words. Dabura. Begin. And we see all the reactions from the different Sumerians. From Cross, sweating, tensing, biting his lip. The man who had so much faith in Dura, sweating tears and glaring on. And Choboloma can't even watch. He closes his third eye and he covers his 2 eyes. As we see Maru leap up towards the end of the fight. He's about to lunge in. And he does. He does get into the arena as Dabura stands there. And at first, when reading this, I thought nothing had even happened. I thought the fight hadn't even started. I thought they were just clenching and preparing for the end. But nope. Cross lunges in, grabs Maru by the head, and slams him into the ground. And as he's still screaming and staring, obviously consumed by what had happened, he says, "Don't be stupid! What the heck are you thinking?" And we see that Maru angrily yells, "You! Dabura, was it? You held back, didn't you? You didn't fight with your full power, and you called yourself a warrior? How dare you disrespect Dura?" And obviously, that would be a massive disrespect. In their culture, as it's even admitted, the Rumelians also revere fighting to a certain sense. So, very specifically, Dabura taking Dura's life without even the grace, the honor of using his full strength. It is one of the most disrespectful things that he could have done, at least to them. But ultimately, Dabura does genuinely apologize, as we see Dura's mangled and brutalized body as he lays there dead. As Dabura says, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to harm his face." So, Dura has fallen. The justification, the beginning for war, the absolute decimation of the Rumelian population is essentially guaranteed. Even after they had already been forced off their original homelands into a much smaller portion, the Discontent people simply wanted more, and more, and more. And they forced this already ostracized group of people who had a great respect for the nature and land around them into a smaller and smaller space to take more and more and more from them after they had already taken so much. Once again, the allegations, very specifically, from the whole oil thing to the nature of the Rumelians as a whole, I think there's a very specific allegory Kekkei's going for. There is like the direct Japanese allegory, as the people from Japan are not actually naturally from Japan. Like, they invaded the island nation that they now are on. But like, there's a current one that I'm thinking of right now that I'm not gonna go into. But like, if you know, you know, right? I'm dancing around it for a reason. But with it being the case, Cross admits, "We later learned that Dabura and Dura were best friends. Back before Rumel's exile, they had pushed each other to become better warriors. Because Dabura hated attention, Dura was the only one who knew how strong he really was." They were brothers, essentially, best friends. And Dabura had to strike him down because ultimately, even though they were close, that was still his sister. That still was his flesh and blood. So of course he was going to fight to protect her, first and foremost. And we see Dura crying from his third eye. Presumably, once again, his own brain matter leaking out. And notably, it's interesting that he's dried out entirely as he's laid to rest in his coffin and off to be buried. And we see a flashback within the flashback. You sure say that a lot, Dura. What, neighbor? Yeah, what does that mean? What does that word mean to you anyway? People who are next to you. Shut up, I wasn't asking you. Neighbors are friends who understand why the things that matter to you are so important. So, of course, it was Dura who gave them that belief. It is interesting, Dura did have markings on his back. I wonder if that was like a full, like, sun-esque marking. And I do wonder if those are entirely natural, too, like their other markings are. But neighbors are friends who understand why the things that matter to you are so important. That's why both Maru and Cross have such a high estimation and belief of that, because their secondary father figure in their life was the person who instilled that belief in them. And we see that ultimately the idea of accepting people as your neighbors, accept us as your neighbors, Dura's last words and his last plea. Cross has been scarred by it. He's after watching the death of it, losing his parent, essentially for the second time. He lost his parents originally when he was very, very young, but then Dura helped raise him to this point. He says, I can't do it, Dura, because the most important thing to us was you. We see his whole coffin marked presumably with a Kalyan. And ultimately we see that they don't even have time to mourn. They don't even have time to really grieve Dura. As they say, what now? Starting tomorrow, this land will belong to Deskunte. At the very least, we'll have to try to evacuate the women and children. But ultimately Cross admits why this is just essentially an attempt to wipe the Rumelians out completely. But there's nothing left on the remaining land. We can't grow anything without the connected waterway, and illness will spread again. And we see the gentleman from last chapter say, if we're dead either way, why don't we fight back? I want to break off those Deskunte fiends' horns and shove them in their bodies. And ultimately, we see another gentleman from last chapter admit, that's just what a warrior would say. But Jabloma admits, but the job of a warrior isn't to fight to the death. It's to protect women and children. Which, unfortunately, like, man, I mean, it is, in this case, I understand it's their traditional culture, but, you know, women can fight too. Children, no, but I don't think children should fight. But then again, even, like, I just don't like conflict, I think. I think it's maybe why I've never really was able to get into properly. I respect football, I respect boxing, I respect MMA, I respect any combat sport. And, like, even then, I'm planning, once I'm fully properly in shape, I also plan to go learn a combat sport. I want to learn how to defend myself properly. But, I don't know, man, conflict just doesn't do it for me. So I believe that no one should really have to fight. But, of course, combat is inevitable between people. War is inevitable between people. No matter what, even if all humans were to look the same, there would be some slight difference that would lead to conflict. It just seems destined. Despite how far we've come as a species, despite how intelligent we are, despite the fact that we are the apex predator of our planet, there is no real reason for us to ever fight. In fact, if we were to truly all work together, if we were to take the greatest minds across the entire planet and allow them all to work together and rise up, we would be infinitely better than we are now. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Humanity is so far from its current potential because we are still so animalistic at our core. The idea that we cannot even begin to transcend such a base idea as conflict, ceaseless, unnecessary conflict, the slaughter of countless lives. Why? Why is that still a thing? It's because humans are still at their core animals. We're still fools. No matter what, we're gonna fight over something, no matter how stupid it is. But sorry, that's a little bit of the hopeless in me speaking. But with it being the case, we see that Maru asks, "Do you think the other tribes will try to help us? Maybe they were swayed by Dura's speech." And then, gentleman, I think exclusive to this chapter says, "They're invading tomorrow. Shouldn't get our hopes up." And that's true, right? They really have no hope in this. And obviously the tribes are already scared of interfering with Deskunte at all. Once again, very similar to our current world. But you see that Cross says, "We were consumed by the fear and anger of knowing someone wanted us dead." And it's true. It is a fear and an anger. Because you can't just lay down and take it, but at the same time you understand there's nothing you can truly do. Especially if Dabra was there to fight for them. But we see that a certain person asks, "Why have you come here?" And both Maru turns in shock to see Dabura, very specifically with another Somorian, presumably another Deskunte, I suppose. And this is clearly Dabura's little sister. Now that he'd completed his mission, they had not let his sister go. She was no longer a hostage, and Dabura came here with her. And he admits, Dura told me that he left something to you. I'll work on Dabura's voice. I still need to figure it out. We see Jabloma admit, all that is... Mo? Sorry, that's not across the voice. Mo? This is the resource that allows them to use their cursed energy. Now, this is interesting. I do wonder, like, how do their curse techniques work? Like, do they have innate curse techniques on top of it? I'm assuming it does, but the mole helps them. Essentially, I think of it like the enchanted blades, right? Not the Datenseki in particular, but I suppose actually is actually very similar to the Datenseki. The material that's used, is it the Datenseki? I forget what it's specifically called, but there's a resource in Kagurabachi that allows you to pull out massive amounts of magical power and energy. I'm assuming mole is essentially the same thing. And we see that Dura had hidden all this mole here. He had done all this mining. We see Dabura, Jabloma, Maru, looks very, very so innocent here. Cross, and then the gentleman from last chapter, I do believe. And we see that Dura had been building up this stockpile for a while. Don't touch those rocks over there. And Cross admits, he separated all the mole he found while digging the canal. And obviously the men ask, why didn't he tell us? And another guy says, I mean, look at all of it. He didn't want the Diskunte to know. And the third gentleman, he must have been in last chapter too, says, oh, I get it. An area around the canal is Kallion territory, so the Diskunte never uncovered it. And that's true. And we see Jabloma say, I'm sure he intended on rebuilding Rumel using these. But ultimately the gentleman says, but they're bound to discover this soon. Was everything Dura did and everything we did a whole big waste? It's that idea that there is no hope, right? Even with them having this resource, even with them having all this, there's nothing they can do. But of course, Dura did have a legacy. He did have hope. And we see in the past, he was asked a question, and he answers, you want to know why I'm doing this? And we see Maru admit, no, I get why you're doing this now. I just want to know why you made this decision in the first place. And we see Dura go, it's a good question. Cities and villages were all once built on the ideals of someone long ago. One day when I'm dead and gone, this canal will remain. Then someone will come along and build something up to improve Rumel even more. That cycle can make us all become one. Don't you think it's kind of amazing? And I agree. I think the beauty of even just the very place I live in, right? The idea that it was built before me and it'll stand after me, but I will have added my own pieces to it, I'll add my own part to it. It's beautiful. The idea of a living legacy, even if it's not truly alive, right? We humans have done beautiful things. We've touched the moon. We've reached the stars. We've lifted into the air. We've done so much. And even when the world is eventually consumed, the idea that there were structures and ideas and thoughts that were built that lasted, that transcended human lifetimes is very, very important. It's why, personally, I do align with Axel from Kingdom Hearts or Lee from Kingdom Hearts' belief that if you are remembered in one way, shape, or form, or if a piece of you is remembered in one way, shape, or form, you never truly die. Your physical form, your consciousness, your being will pass away. But as long as a person remembers you, as long as your name still rings in history, you'll never truly fade away. So, of course, with the sun destined to explode, and that's very likely never figuring out interstellar travel on our own, we will probably be wiped away one day. But still, the idea that we could last as long as we have, we've lasted as long as we did, and we will continue to. The mark, whether it be because of our own self-destruction or not, I think that's beautiful. I do think that cycle, that circle of life, yet that ability to transcend the circle through creation, it is a beautiful thing. It is something that transcends. And we see that both Maru and Cross looking on like, you're overforming right now, Dora, and I don't get it. As he says, I guess you don't get it, huh? But Maru says, no, I think it's really amazing. And Cross goes, yeah, it is amazing. But obviously Cross more the realist and Maru more the hope. They both have different reactions, even if they are both happy with it. But we see that Maru, the hope, the future, the light, touches this mole and says, it's not a waste at all. Just like the canal. This is the path forward, left to us Rumelians by Dura. And we see that he reaches out to Cross in particular. Both begin to presumably use their curse technique, use their Royoroka enhanced by the mole. And suddenly, it all begins to glow and forge and move. I wonder what this could mean, especially considering this planet doesn't seem prepared for interstellar travel, and they're being wiped out soon. But we see Everyone that's looking on is in shock. What's that? Maru and Cross is Oyuloka? Seemingly they're cursed energy, right? Because we know that's cursed energy, not cursed technique based on the translation. But we see everything begins to rumble and rise and shape and form, and Chabloma is shocked. It can't be. There's something with even greater purity than mole. So this isn't even mole in the traditional sense, it's like a super pure rock. Which is a thing, like typically whenever there's special resources in manga, there are like levels of purity. And even in our real world, there are levels of purity to different like stones and stuff like that. So this is possible and is real. And we see that ultimately Maru has declared hope for the future. So he is not royalty, as I once thought he was. He is not a destined person to do greatness. No, he's just a man with a dream inspired by a man who came before him. Ultimately, Maru and Cross together are Dura's living legacy, the Rumelian's living legacy. Or not even living legacy, the Rumelians are still alive, luckily, but Dura's living legacy in particular, as he says, "Let's go search together, everyone, for a place where we can live safely." And of course, we see one of the men say, somewhere like that doesn't even exist. And Maru says, "Sure it does. There must be a planet out there like this where people like us live. I'm sure we'll find it if we leave Samoria." And naturally, the guy asks, "Leave Samoria? Leave the planet?" And Dabura, with his sister, once again I'm assuming, says, "I'll go with you. I promise, Dura, that I will protect the Rumelians." Then let's go! So this chapter obviously explains why Dabura himself hasn't just stomped over Earth. Hasn't stomped over Earth and taken it over. One, because while it is seemingly built into his culture, he is Diskunte by nature, he promised Dura to protect the Rumelians. Now that he's completed his job, now that he has his sister safe, he abandoned Diskunte. He abandoned Samoria, all to protect the Rumelians, to fulfill the request of his lost best friend. And he went with them. But the reason Cross was looking for a reason to begin conflict, to get Dura to move, or get Dabura to move, is because one, Dabura himself doesn't like to fight. He doesn't like to show off his full strength. He doesn't like to be all he can be. And he doesn't believe in combat in the same way that his people do. He doesn't believe that might makes right. So Cross was looking for an excuse to use Dabura as the weapon that he presumably is. But we see that Maru points to the sky and says, "Then let's go! Let's go far beyond the sky to find our neighbors!" And they create the ship. The ship that currently is what allows them to exist in order to leave Samoria and enter the stars. So I was right. It did feel weird that they didn't have interstellar travel already set up. It wasn't a thing. But both Cross and Maru create that through their own beliefs, their own dreams, their own power, all through the effort of Dura, their second father. He created they are his living legacy, and through them they shall reach the stars and find neighbors. Even this is, in a way, is an allegory, but it's not full. This one is like looser and more like hopeful. The idea that those who are oppressed by those with greater power and ability than them can reach out and find their own future in a world beyond theirs. And this is where the idealistic hope of it comes in. But overall, if you can tell by how much else happened, you can tell by my extreme glaze, my over-analysis of everything. Yeah, this is a double chapter. One amazing chapter. Another banger. Gaze is dropping banger after banger after banger after banger after banger. It's consistently hitting. I don't know, dog. But regardless, this is an amazing chapter. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please do me a favor and leave Beyond the Stars in the comment section down below. I want to thank you so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. And make sure you hit that little notification bell so you do not miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do happen to have a Patreon down below where you support me for as little as $1 a month to get things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also now become a member to the channel for as little as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Some of those perks include the live reactions, so the series I happen to review, ad reactions of all my videos, and if you become a $200 patron or a $250 member, you can order whatever video you want. Also have a link to my Ko-Fi stream down below. You drop 5 cents for a short video, 200 videos, long video, or any means at all. Any support is always greatly appreciated. Some of the exclusive content, sorry, I so quickly defaulted to the original outro because I've been doing it for so long. But also, if you become a member or a patron for as little as $1 a month, or you become a member for as little as $3 a month, you get your name at the end of literally every single video, early access to all my content, including the content over on the second channel that got the reaction. They are typically like hour-plus long reaction videos that drop every Saturday at 1 p.m. EST, but you can get them early as part of becoming a patron and a member. You get your name at the end of every single video. If you're a $3 member or higher, you get your name said at the end of every single video, and it helps out immensely. please do. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you are a $5 patron or more, you can request a short video, or if you $25 patron or more, you can get a video of any length that you request. All that. But now, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That Guy with a Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our sketch tier members: Flame, Red Wolf 4765, Astro, Glacier XZ, Zera, Brandon Payne, J2MA, Guillaume, Buddha Uda, Alex Kenny, Enzo, Swift Strike, Superflame Zero, Yuki Ally, Azo2404, Strike Man, Grim, Straw, Ollie, The Boy, Corey Watson, Damon Brown, Magic, CCC, Official Popeyes, Ramondo Furen, Create Panem, Serafiel, Dino, Axis XC, Plant Crone, Pickle, Heath Nelson, Hector Gonzalez, P-Sub, and Black Sage. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our line art tier patrons: A+A, Kevin Encarnacion, Dread Zoan, Sean, and Midnight Lord 21. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our Ink tier members: King RTX and Shrimpo the 4 Shrimp 06. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our digital art tier members: J Warrior and AZ Void. Then I'd like to give a thank you to our colored art tier patrons: Walkie Munoz and Walkie Munoz.